And now, your go-to source for year-round fantasy hockey advice, DFS, and betting coverage. This is NHL Fantasy on Ice, presented by Skip, the official food delivery app of the NHL.
The dog days of summer may be here, but rest assured another fantasy hockey season is just around the corner. Brought to you by our good friends over at Skip. Hello and welcome to another episode of NHL Fantasy on Ice. Hope you're having a fantastic summer. Nick Alberga, Pete Jensen, and Jake Hahn with you. And Pete, today we're working on your top 200 rankings. You've been working feverishly the last couple months. What's going on, buddy?
What's up, Nick? What's up, Jake? Yeah, definitely working some long hours here in spurts in the summer, taking some downtime for sure. But on the projections, you could find them 32 and 32 on NHL.com, and the top 200 rankings on NHL.com/fantasy will be all over it today.
Jake Hahn, my man, how are you, buddy?
Good, boys. Great to be back with you again, getting ready for a new season, fantasy season. Pete, I hope you've been able to get at least a little bit of sleep, working feverishly on that top 200 list that you put together. But it's a great list, and we're ready to agree, disagree on some of it here.
That's exactly it. Plenty of debates coming your way. We got a lot of questions. Kudos to everybody. I know it's a long summer, but we got some questions via Instagram and social media, so we're going to get to those as well. Guys, I want to start, Pete, with your ideology, your thoughts that went behind your top 200 first and foremost.
Right. Consistency is huge. If you could get a guy that has like multiple 40-goal seasons, multiple 100-point seasons. Obviously, I think a big question at the top, Jake, is where do you target Leon Draisaitl? He's been taken at number 2 many times in the past, but a down year last year, let's be honest, by his standards, with only 106 in the points department. But it's his contract year, so you can make the argument for him at 2, in my opinion, even over McKinnon or Pasternak or anybody like that, Matthews.
Well, I think the draft starts at 2, guys. Well, obviously, we know who goes 1 in almost every single draft. I would hope across the board, Connor McDavid's going 1. But I think the debate at 2 is fascinating, right? You just talked about Draisaitl and, coming off, I guess, a down year by his standards, but still an awesome season. Nathan MacKinnon's in that conversation. I think Austin Matthews and his potential to get to 70 goals could be in that conversation as well. Nick, I don't know if you'd throw another name in there, and Nikita Kucherov coming off of what he did. But I actually think compared to maybe previous years, that debate at number 2 is as good as we've seen in a long time.
It is a unique one, guys. I will say I'm going to Ireland in a couple days. I'll be sipping on some Guinness. I'll be sipping on some Guinness if I have the number 2 overall pick. Okay, I'm going with Nathan MacKinnon, bona fide. Category coverage, coming off a Hart Trophy, 140 points last year, shoots the puck a ton. My belief too, Pete, Val Nichushkin's not there. We don't know if Landeskog's going to be there. I think McKinnon's got to grab this team again, and I'm going to go with McKinnon at 2. I'm being profound with that.
Right. 3 players, as good as Edmonton is with 4 in the top 20, Colorado, even with their suspect secondary scoring, Jake, 3 in the top 12. So if you miss out on Mac, you could get Rantanen anywhere from 6 to 12, probably, depending on how it shakes out. And then, oh yeah, by the way, Cale Makar, who has 100-point potential on the blue line, which is pretty insane in itself.
I would hear a case for probably a few different players at 2, but I'm with Nick on Nathan MacKinnon. If I've got that second overall pick, it's just the category coverage. We've been debating for years. When is Nathan MacKinnon going to put together a full healthy season? And what can he do with a full 82 game season? Well, we saw it last year. I guess the downside is if he does get hurt, obviously those numbers are going to go down, but that's a risk you play with any player. And the shots on goal are just incredible, guys. I feel like he's going to generate a shot on goal every time he steps on the ice. So Nathan MacKinnon at 2 for me, but I would hear a case for at least 3 or 4 different guys right now.
Yeah, for the first time in a while, it's not just Draisaitl at number 2, and I'm very, very looking forward to that debate. I just wanted to add as well, Mikko Rantanen contract here, and he's attached to the hip of Nathan MacKinnon, so watch out for that. Pete, you had mentioned Cale Makar. I think there's a lot of debate when it comes to fantasy hockey after Makar. What defenseman do you take? Jake, we'll start with you. Obviously, a variety of names: Hughes, Bouchard, Yossi, Hedman, Fox, Dahlin, Sergachev. But for me, I can't overlook that team that went very, very far in the Stanley Cup playoffs, lost in Game 7. Obviously, the attachment to McDavid and Draisaitl.
I mean, it's tough to pass up on the Bouch bomb, right? And that attachment to PP1, like you mentioned, Nick. I will give Quinn Hughes a lot of credit here, and I still think I'm leaning towards him in this debate at the moment. It's close between him and Bouchard after Makar for me, but Quinn Hughes made a believer in me. I was never a Quinn Hughes guy in fantasy. Added the shots on goal a little bit, especially early in the season, and maybe that Canucks team takes a little bit of of a step back and see some negative regression. I think a lot of people are calling for that. I don't maybe see them having the season that they had last year, but I think Quinn Hughes is still going to pick up right where he left off. So I'm going Hughes. PD, what about you? Are you in on the Bushbaum, Hughes, maybe another name there at number 2?
I think that Vancouver regression comment, at least some slight, is really valid. I mean, it's like New Jersey Devils from the previous year. You have to give all due respect to all the good things they did. We're back high on the Devils this year, but that blip on the radar last year as a result of a couple injuries and stuff like that could affect the Petterssons and the Bessers and even the mighty Quinn Hughes of the world. So I would go Bouchard at number 2. And then also Nick, I know you're a Hedman guy through and through. Now that Sergachev is gone, he's got that power play to himself. He's going to put up 35, 40 power play points on his own, even if Tampa like misses the playoffs or something.
Well, I'll tell you what, I turned 35 this summer. Hedman's getting a little long in the tooth there, but certainly a big fan of him. And it's funny you say that about the Canucks. In my notes, I wonder if the Canucks take a step back. Hunter to the hunted. We said that about the New Jersey Devils last summer, and very, very looking forward and intrigued with the Vancouver Canucks, how they pulled forward this season. The goaltending, guys, is really, really fascinating, Jake, as well. Because I don't know how you handle the crease in general and strategy wise when it comes to fantasy hockey, but for me, it has changed a lot in the last couple of years, man. I got blown up trying to take a goalie way, way too quickly last year. How would you attack the position this time around, Jake?
Well, I tend to avoid taking a goaltender until I have to. I mean, you get to a point in the draft where you're like, okay, I should probably take a tender at this point. I get the case for taking one early and just crossing it off the list and saying, okay, I've got a stud, I've got an Igor, a Sorokin maybe going into last year, although he even lost his job last season. So that just tells you how finicky the goaltending position can be, guys. And you can wait to the mid rounds, and I think you could get some value. Now you're taking a huge risk. You could end up like me in one league last year and have both your goaltenders in the American Hockey League when I drafted Jack Campbell and Akira Schmid. So that obviously didn't work out, but there's been other years where I take that shot in the mid rounds and you end up with a bona fide starter. So that's the risk I'm willing to take. I think you could almost ride the waiver wire a little bit with goaltenders now in fantasy hockey because we see so many goaltenders used. But I'm curious of your strategy, Nick. Are you willing to pay up for one of those top goaltenders in the first few rounds?
Well, I was just going to add, like, a lot of this is dependent on league format, but like you, I think the position again has become so volatile, Pete, where it's like, I really can't put it out there and be like, I'm going to take a top 30 pick, like let's say a top 3-round pick on a goaltender, because you just don't know what's going to happen. How would you attack it, Pete?
So if I was going to rank number 1, I would say it's Igor, because the Rangers are such a consistently good team in the regular season. They always slip up in the playoffs, it seems. But it's funny, right? We got a fan question, of course, delivered by Skip, and it's an interesting one. Andrei Vasilevskiy, 10 times out of 10, I'd rather have him on my team in real life over Stuart Skinner. But which guy, if you need wins more, would you rather have in fantasy this year? That's probably an undisputed answer in Skinner's favor. What do you think, Jake?
That's a good question, because I think you've got the more tried and true option there in Vasilevskiy, where he's going to be the guy. And as much as we all like Skinner now, and Skinner proved a lot of the doubters, including myself, wrong in that playoff run. He stepped up in some big moments when Edmonton needed him. So he looks like a legitimate starter. But guys, it rarely works in straight lines in the NHL. And all of a sudden, Skinner has a bad couple of weeks and he loses his net, and that whole scenario plays out. So do I fully trust him as a top pick? I don't, just because the sample size is still relatively small on him. I still feel like I go with the tried and true Vasilevskiy. I know what I'm going to get from him every single year, even though Edmonton's probably going to be a better team than Tampa this year. I go with the tried and true option of Vasilevskiy.
That right there just supports this entire debate, right? Where it's like, why would you bid up to get a goaltender? I don't care if it's Shesterkin. The one guy I did hit on last year, actually got value on, was Connor Hellebuck. But even like 2 through 10, like there's just so many unknowns, like Bobrovsky off a cup. Demko, Hellebuck, Ottinger's another guy I'm really, really fascinated with this season. There's just way too much debate for me, and I'm sitting back. To answer the fan question there, I think I lean Skinner just because somebody has to play for the Oilers, and I view that team as a perennial contender for the President's Trophy, where I think there's going to be a bit of a dip, Pete, for the Tampa Bay Lightning. But it's tough for me. I'm a huge Vasilevskiy guy, but maybe just squeaking an edge towards Skinner there, Pete.
Well, Tampa, I know, have been knocking them so far. They lost Stamkos in the offseason and Sergachev, who I'm really high on, in that Utah Hockey Club. As I mentioned in the previous show, you could check out that episode for some offseason moves reaction. more specifically. But yeah, when I look at Edmonton, like I feel like the writing's on the wall for that team. They need to win the cup this season. Everybody knows it. And look at what they have done this offseason. Stole Matthew Savoy from the Sabres, stole Podkolzin yesterday from the rival Canucks, right, who had their number last year. And then also, by the way, got Jeff Skinner and Victor Arvidsson. So absolutely loaded, even though they're going to start the season without Evander Kane because of injury.
Pete, I know it's summer. I didn't witness any theft on social media. I mean, I know people are going nuts over Podkolzin going to Edmonton, but like Jim Rutherford's one of the smartest executives. So is Alvin. They wouldn't just give this guy up if they didn't think there was something going on there. Like, what's
Fair.
the view on this, guys? What are we hearing on Podkolzin?
I don't know about Podkolzin being the steal, but I
Yeah.
do think that Edmonton did some solid business in the offseason, adding to a roster that was already good. As you guys know, when you're pressed up against the salary cap, when you're a cup contending team the way Edmonton is, often you have cap problems. You have issues improving your roster. Like, look at what the Panthers had to do. They almost had to lose pieces in the offseason, obviously to keep guys and, give Reinhart a big contract. But with Edmonton, I felt like they were at least able to add to the roster up front. Maybe the blue line past Bouchard still a little bit of a concern on paper, and money is an issue there. But I think adding a guy like Skinner, adding a guy like Arvidsson into that mix of top 9 forwards, to me, that's solid business when you're pressed up against the cap like Edmonton.
3 words on Podkolzin, and Petey's flying off the handle on Podkolzin. Nightly healthy scratch. Okay, that's what you all you need to know about Podkolzin.
Listen, one of my worst takes of all time was that like the Canucks' best wing in a couple of years would be Podkolzin. So I'm still picking up the pieces from that one. But hey, if he's holding up the cup with a 30-goal season somehow from playing with one of those two guys, I'll be a happy camper at least. So maybe that's why I'm siding with the kid, that he still has something left to give in the NHL.
And I guess we'll find out over the next couple of days involving the offer sheets to Broberg and Holloway. Maybe that opens up some action there as well for Podkolzin. We did get a question about him, as you mentioned. Steve writes in, like Podkolzin as a deep sleeper after trade Oilers via our friends. It's, I don't know, deep sleeper, deep, I would say, on Podkolzin. This is a really good question brought to you by our good friends again over at Skip. Korpisalo with Bruins going to have more wins than Ullmark. That's from Dustin, Jake. How about that?
Oh, I like that question. That's a good one. I actually really do like this spot for the Corpedo. I mean, in terms of starts, that part could be a little bit difficult just because we know whose net that is. But I do still think he's going to get his chance to get in there, and the games that he plays on a per game basis. So you might get frustrated and only get one start per week, but I think it's going to be a quality start from him. And I don't know. I think Ullmark's in for a rude awakening, guys. Being insulated behind that Boston team for a couple years, obviously having a ton of success, winning a Vezina trophy, goes to Ottawa. I think it's going to be a little bit more of a tire fire in front of him. So I don't think I fully trust Ullmark. I think I'd rather have the Corpedo and get him later in my draft.
Yeah, I won't lie. I have a bone to pick with Ullmark. I had him on Leafs Morning Take, my podcast earlier this summer before he was traded. He didn't want to go to the Maple Leafs, but he wanted to go to the Ottawa Senators. And speaking of which, we talked about Korpisalo. I know we got a Bold Takes podcast coming up in a couple months here, guys, but I'm really high on Korpisalo. The one thing we've noticed with Boston in, say, the last decade, Pete, they love their tandem. Yeah, Swayman's going to be their guy. Still got to pay him, mind you. But I think there's potential. If Korpisalo plays well, they love to keep their goaltenders fresh, and I think there's going to be a lot of value. Let's say you handcuff that Bruins crease, Pete. You're going to be smart about it.
Right. And it's not that you ever want to predict an injury, but remember what Bob Bender, producer extraordinaire, said about Bedard last year. If you're expecting an increased workload by a lot for Swayman, as much as I like him in fantasy drafts as a top 5 goalie, like you could just bet on Korpisalo picking up some extra starts. If he does deal with injury or production inconsistency, he's probably going to get you like 15 wins by default on a team like the Bruins. I wanted to ask you guys, how much stock do you put into the strength of a team when drafting a goalie in the mid to late rounds? Like you could get in the late rounds, probably Connor Ingram from Utah, pretty good team, adding Sergachev with a young core. Also, like even Joey Decord. I don't trust the Kraken. That guy had like one of the best save percentages in the league last year with 50 plus games played.
I think I would rather take a shot, guys, on a goaltender that I know is on at least a half decent team, even though I'm not sure of the start share. You know, if I think he's going to be the 1B or possibly the backup, I'd rather have a goaltender on a quality team, even if he gets the less starts, than take a shot on a starter on one of the worst teams in the league, right? And say, well, yeah, this guy's going to get 70% of the starts. Well, most of them are going to be losses in games where he's given up 4 or 5 goals every single game. So I would always rather go towards the team that I think is going to win some more games. And if I have to take less starts on the goaltender, that's fine. I can figure that out. My goals against, my save percentage are still going to be in a good position. How do you play that, Nick?
Look, my concrete answer, anything goaltenders, it's so volatile. Wait and see approach. Okay, I'll tell you how it is in 3 months from now, because I can select the guy in the 4th round. He can blow up on me. Like Jake, just as you mentioned, and I had 2 guys who I drafted top 120 that were in the AHL by mid-November. And I think the one thing to expect right away is the majority of guys get blown up in October. So it's so tough to quantify the crease, but we do have another question from our good friends over at Skip, man. They're delivering even in the summer, which you love to see. Keeper league question. Pete, we'll start with you. It's regarding the crease. Wallstead, Askarov, or Levi. I probably know which way you're going to head, Pete, but who of the 3 would you pick in a keeper league right now?
Prior to the Saros extension in Nashville, I probably would have said Askarov, but I'll probably go Wallstead. I think that the Minnesota Wild will eventually make this guy their number 1 as early as this season. Gustafsson wasn't that great last year. Fleury's near the end of his career, so it wouldn't be surprised if they turn the page eventually. With UPL having such a great season, Jake, I can't put as much trust into Levi as I would have, say, this time last year.
Yeah, I think PD nailed it with that one, just in terms of the path to getting to being the starter. And I think you have to be more patient with the other guys, although they seem to love Levi. They also gave UPL a lot of money, to starter money, right? So you'd think that he's going to be the guy for the foreseeable future unless he gives up that net. So I would go with Wallstead as well. I just think that he's got a clear path to something close to a number 1 role at the very least. Do you have any interest in the Sabres goaltending at all, Nick, with UPL or Levi? Are you taking a shot on any Sabres this year?
This is a shocker, boys. Devin Levi's my answer. UPL, Levi tandem. I think there's going to be a bounce back of sorts, Pete. I hate to bring this up. You know how I feel about rookie goalies. He's got his feet in the league a bit here. Watch out for, I wouldn't say watch out for Buffalo, but I think Levi is the real deal. So I would go with him. I think Wallstead is stuck behind 2 guys right now. Maybe in a year from now, we have this convo. It's a bit different. But my big wild card, before we did this podcast today, it sounds like Yaroslav Askarov wants a trade. He has made it definitive and clear. And the one caveat, he wants to play in the NHL this season. So if you're looking at a keeper league, and of the 3 guys, who is most likely to get the most games, in my opinion, right now, Pete, in the first half, it's probably Askarov, depending on where he goes. But I wouldn't pull the trigger right now, because he could end up in like San Jose for all we know.
That's what I'm personally pulling for there. And then, keeping it on the topic of Celebrini and some young players, Jake, I wanted to ask you, because we talked about this a little bit in his upside, but we got a question about a keeper dynasty draft where someone's picking in the top 5 and they're debating between Matvei Michkov for the better team in Philly compared to Macklin Celebrini, who maybe has a higher ceiling down the road.
I'd go Celebrini. I like the higher ceiling down the road, even though year 1 might not be the year. I'm excited about Michkov, guys. I'm sure we all are, to see how he fits in with a team that showed a lot last year. Philly was a great surprise. They fizzled out at the end of the season. It was a bad ending, but he's probably going to end up in Torts' doghouse within at least 2 or 3 weeks, right? Like when's the anytime healthy scratch? That's got to happen in the first month of the season. But he looks like a talented player. I'm sure they're going to find an offensive role for him there, and I do think that it works out. But long term, I think you want the stud, the possible generational talent in Celebrini.
I will be avoiding Michkov like the plague. I am not jumping to select this guy, Pete. I know him and Fedotov, the goalie in Philadelphia, are your boys. I'm sorry to talk ill of them. I'm right there with Jake. Like, I love Michkov. Again, A, he's never played in North America. B, he doesn't speak the language. And 3, he's got John Tortorella there. Like, that scares me, right? Like, any other coach, you'd be like, this kid is a bona fide contender and could very well still be, obviously, for the rookie of the year. But I think when posed to that question right now, Pete, I'm going with Celebrini. I just think there's more rain there. Obviously, the attachment of some of the players, and there's no pressure to win in San Jose this season either.
Speaking of young players, guys, I want to get both your takes on Connor Bedard, because obviously great rookie season, wins the Calder Trophy. now, we're going to be looking at drafting him quite high. How high is too high for you guys? Like what part of the draft do you think is fair for Connor Bedard? Do you pull the trigger sometime in round 2, or do you go with the tried and true options? Nick, what do you think?
Well, firstly, I'll say the NHL.com rank. I'll let Pete break down how he ranked this. You got him 50, right, Pete?
Yeah, I'm totally comfortable enough in my own skin to take him in the top 50, but how high is too high? Probably top 25, top 30, something like that. It's still going to be a bad team in Chicago, but it should be better. He was very productive, near a point per game last year when he was healthy. Add in if the top number 2 pick, Lev Shinov, plays, he signed his ELC, so he could be there. Seth Jones, healthy. Taylor Hall, healthy. Tyler Bertuzzi, welcome to the show. And Teuvo Teravainen, welcome back to Chicago. That's a pretty good group of players compared to what they had last year.
Producer Bob, plug your ears, man. I'm sorry to say it. I am stretching as far as number 30 on Connor Bedard. Okay, I know the ranking's 50. Pete did a great job with those, but I think he's set to absolutely pop off. I'm talking 30 to 40 goals, 80 to 90 points. The attachment of Bertuzzi and Teravainen. He's got a couple better line mates this season. Bobby, do you like that or no?
This has been a little bit of a cottage industry, us talking about Bedard, trying to project what's going on. I'll say this, Petey, 50? Wow, that's pretty down the sheet there. I'm a little surprised he's that low, 50. I agree. I think this is the season Bedard is wheeling and I agree with you.
Wow.
I could see a monster year from Bedard. Individually, a year kind of goes by. He's comfortable. We saw flashes of brilliance in year 1. Of course, we had the injury. He stays healthy. Big year, 50, Pete. Come on, buddy. Come on, you're better than that.
To go out of your playbook, man, like he's on the smaller side, just like Jack Hughes. That's why I'm reluctant as opposed to last year. Remember, I was super high on Jack Hughes. My team still did pretty well in our draft, second behind Nick Alberga, but like that pick didn't live up to its potential because Hughes missed some significant time with an injury. So you still have to have that in the back of your mind when you're taking a guy that high, like Zach Hyman. As much as you can say whatever you want about him, he's a safer pick than Connor Bedard every day of the week in the top 25.
All in on Bedard, guys. I love to play the ceiling here, right? Like I understand it's a risk. I totally get it where you're drafting a younger player and you could go with the tried and true option, the guy that scored 40 a few times, but I'm a ceiling guy. I want to go and win my league. I want to take some chances. And if there's a chance that Connor Bedard goes out there, I know Nick said, 30 to 40. Hey, maybe 40 to 45. Maybe he's just that good and he steps up and has that kind of season. I want some exposure to that, so I'm willing to take the risk on a stud young talent like a Connor Bedard.
One thing I'll be doing is playing that shot prop. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Another rook I want to talk about, we can debate him too, Logan Stankoven. Pete, you have him at 112. I think he's probably in my top 80 range. I think this guy's legit. Joe Pavelski's gone. And I don't forecast a sophomore slump for Logan Stankoven, if you want to call it that. He obviously came up midway through last season. He's going to be in the rookie conversation. How do you feel on Stankoven, Pete?
I think because of the strength of the team, and even after Joe Pavelski retired, Jake, like that's a huge spot on one of the best lines in the league with Hintz and Robertson that's now up for grabs for the right wing. I mean, it could be Stankoven, it could be Wyatt Johnston, could be someone else like Duchesne, but I mean, there are going to be a lot of points for whoever gets into that spot. So I think personally, Stankoven is the safest pick to win the Calder this year over Celebrini, over Michkov, over Will Smith, and anybody else that you want to find, Cutter Gauthier or anybody like that.
You guys are right about the opportunity for Stankoven, and he's an exciting player. I really do enjoy watching him. My problem with the Stars is they spread things out so much now. They actually have so many good forwards that you don't know who's going to produce on a night-to-night basis. They've kind of become like the Carolina Hurricanes were for years, but in the Western Conference. Like we remember the frustration we had with drafting Jason Robertson so high last year, Rope Hintz as well. It was because they wanted to become a true four-line team, and I think they're going to remain that way going into this year. So as much as there's probably going to be some big nights for Stankoven, there might be some stretches where he goes away and just kind of gets lost in that spread out offense. So I'm not saying I'm avoiding the Stars by any means, but I would watch out for that this year in drafting Stars too high.
I like the take on Jason Robertson. I've actually had a couple people reach out lately and ask me about Robertson. Bounce back, Jason Robertson all over that file. Speaking of bounce back, Pete, there's some teams that didn't necessarily play well last year or make the playoffs that I think we're back in on this year. I think will provide a lot of value. Some teams I'd bring forward, to start this convo, Pete. New Jersey, St. Louis, and Utah. Who are some of the guys you like?
Yeah, I like Utah. I know we got a fan question about Clayton Keller versus Jesper Bratt. You could debate all you want. Hedman versus Sergachev, with Sergachev now in Utah. I'm sneaky high on Utah. I'm not going to be reaching for them like, in the first couple of rounds, but I'm going to try to get a piece of that team in the mid to late rounds, whichever way I can, whether it's Logan Cooley or, reaching maybe for Sergachev.
Answer the question.
Utah. That's my team. I mean, the Devils are really good too, but we all expect them to make the playoffs. That's an obvious answer, I think.
I'm bullish on Utah as well, guys. I actually think there's a playoff spot for them in the Western Conference if they want to go out and get it. Use some of that magic, right? That dark cloud of Arizona that was hanging over them for years. You get to a new area, and look, they have some talent on that roster. So I have no idea what the St. Louis Blues are, Nick. I know you mentioned them. I literally have no clue what to do with that team, so I'm probably just going to leave them alone. The Devils are fascinating. Obviously, all the talent is there. I don't know if you guys have a take on Jack Hughes, if you feel like he could be a great value. To me, I think he's a top 5 talent in this league. And if you're getting him at the back end of the first round, that's a ceiling type player I'd be willing to take a shot on. And the Dougie Hamilton debate as well. When we're talking about bounce backs, this guy missed basically the whole year with injury. Does he bounce back and get right back into form? Or, is Luke Hughes starting to push him for power play time on that first unit?
We'll have to sprinkle a bit on this podcast. Jack Hughes for the Hart Trophy. Thank you very much. And also Sheldon Keefe. I think he's the runaway favorite right now for the Jack Adams. I really, really like New Jersey. I like the Markstrom pickup. Love the Hughes brothers. I think there's obviously a lot of value in Dougie Hamilton. I just had one quick take on Utah. Relocation boost is real. I think they're going to have a sneaky good year like you guys. Strong fan base. They got Keller, they got Hayton, they got Cooley, Gunther, Michelli, Josh Stone's in the mix, Sergachev and Dursey. The crease I wonder about a bit, but I think there could potentially be a playoff spot there for Utah. On St. Louis, never underestimate what they can do here under Drew Bannister in a full season. Kyrou Thomas. Look out for Scott Perunovich running the first power play unit. We know Torrey Krug is done there. And again, landing back to New Jersey, Pete, I just think there's a lot of value. And that's probably the one team people are going to try to pick apart really, really quickly in drafts, Pete.
Right. So when I look at the Devils roster right now, I don't see many flaws at all. They were a top 10 possession team last year, even though they missed the playoffs. They have Markstrom now. They still got those quality wings like Timo Meier and Jesper Bratt that have 35, 40 goal potential any given season. Jack Hughes, Luke Hughes, that combination will probably get them at least to the Cup final at some point in their careers, as long as they last in New Jersey. So yeah, I'm really high on them to be among the heavyweights this year.
I think it's got to be Timo time this year, guys. I know I already mentioned Jack Hughes as a guy that I'd be targeting at some point. I know he's more of a first round guy, but he's somebody I think could just have a monster season. Nick, I know you backed it up saying maybe a sprinkle on the Hart Trophy. I think it's got to be Timo time. Look, a few years ago, this guy was awesome in San Jose, different fit in New Jersey. There's more mouths to feed. He's maybe not the puck dominant player that he was in San Jose, but I think this is the year that maybe he pops. And if we can get him at value, I know the Devils might be a little popular in fantasy. Timo's a guy I'd be targeting that I think could have a monster goal scoring season this year.
You have to have a long memory in fantasy hockey. If you recall post-coaching change last year, Timo Meier was unbelievable, but obviously Travis Green now with the Ottawa Senators, so we'll see how he does under Sheldon Keefe. Pete, you love your debates, so why don't you throw one our way here?
Sure. We got a question from a fan about Brady Tkachuk. Is he worthy of being taken in the first round of a keeper league draft? I would say fringe first round, but I really like him. I'll debate him all day and pick him over Matthew Tkachuk. I know Matthew's on his victory lap tour after winning the cup and stuff like that, but few players deliver the category coverage of his brother Brady.
We should preface this conversation, Jake. Pete, we'll probably do a fantasy draft in September. Pete will take Brady Tkachuk, very likely on his team. We love Brady Tkachuk at this podcast. But to that point, Jake, there's got to be a year where the Ottawa Senators take that next step, right? And it's got to be led by their captain.
That's what they keep telling me, and it never happens. And according to Matt Tkachuk, post game after he won the cup, he was saying it's only a matter of time before you see my brother Brady here. Unless Matt decides to jump ship and go to Ottawa to help his brother Brady, I don't see it happening. Now, from a fantasy perspective, Brady is a stat stuffer. We know that. So I think it does come down to categories in your league. If you've got all those greasy categories, then yeah, he's a first round keeper without a doubt in my mind. If you don't, I think you could look somewhere else. I still think he leaves something to be desired in terms of the total points at the end of the year. Does love to shoot a lot. So it really comes down to categories for me. But no, Nick, I'm not buying in Ottawa or any of these teams in the Atlantic to take a step because the Big Four is still so good.
It is very puzzling when you look at the Atlantic Division in general. Across the division, wasn't really a strong summer for anybody. Maybe the Maple Leafs. I still have some questions about that team. Buffalo, I think, got worse. They haven't made the playoffs in like 13 years. The Ottawa Senators, they really didn't do much. Like, there's a lot of question marks, but Ottawa specifically, I just wonder if there's a bit of magic under Travis Green. I like the job he did last year. I like what he did obviously a couple of years back, and Brady Tkachuk. It's one thing to talk. It's one thing now to dominate. And I think there's potential there in fantasy hockey. So I'm actually higher than most people on Brady Tkachuk, but Ottawa, man, I just tell you, even talking about Allmark, Pete, I just don't know what I'm going to get at him this year.
Yeah, that's just the team, right? You just got to look back at the history and say, like, I'm not going to put my name out there to pick that team.
Yeah.
Playoffs, but maybe in the late rounds of a fantasy draft, I would take a stab at Jake Sanderson. Now that Chikrin's gone, Jake, and obviously Thomas Chabot always gets injured. Unfortunately, you hope he stays healthy, but probably not based on history. So maybe Sanderson as a late round breakout candidate.
Speaking of Atlantic Division teams that did absolutely nothing in the offseason, the Montreal Canadiens, guys, I think Quinn Hughes was just asleep for like 2 months. I think the only move they made was bringing in Barry Boulet, and he's French Canadian. So they had to fill their quota of French Canadians, so they bring him in. Do you guys have any interest there in fantasy? Like a Slafkovsky, obviously he did pop last year and he looks like a stud, and it looks like maybe they actually have a legit top line for the first time in a while in Montreal. Nick, do you have any interest in Slafkovsky or any of those Habs up front?
I would not sleep on the Montreal Canadiens. Martin St. Louis, maybe a little sprinkle on the Jack Adams. These teams are always scary. They work extremely hard. There's no pressure to win. I would throw Lane Hutson's name into the conversation for the Calder Trophy. That guy is so dynamic on the back end. Like, I don't want to compare him to Cale Makar. Obviously, he shoots different. But, I mean, he is elusive with the puck. And, again, there's no pressure to win in that market right now. So I would be weary if I have the opposition of the Montreal Canadiens. I actually believe in that team a bit more. I like Slafkovsky. Nick Suzuki's coming off a big year. And Pete, don't forget, some of these guys are playing for spots at the Four Nations next winter too.
Right. And look, Suzuki had like in the 70s in points last year.
Yeah.
An 82 guy, even if the Habs are one of the worst teams in the league. That's what you look for from those bottom feeder teams. If you look at the Sharks, there's a lot of, mouths to feed, even though they're a bad team. Anaheim, same thing. It's going to work through the offense, through a lot of different talented young players. You know that the guys that are going to be, eating in the kitchen in Montreal are those three guys, and maybe Matheson or Hudson, like you said, but Slafkovsky, Caulfield, and Suzuki all day long.
Hot Dog Steam A in Montreal, the Bell Center has some of the best press food in the league. So, guys, we're going to leave it at that. I got to pack for my trip. We can't go on for 2 hours here. Producer Bobby, final word to you, buddy.
Final word. Wow. What an honor. What an honor here. We have plenty of season preview episodes to come. Nick Alberga going to go on vacation. Jake Hahn going to be in the rotation. We're going to have a full party of folks joining us throughout the off season as we get to puck drop. I just wanted to drop this on FanDuel. All right. Before the season gets going, take a look at the Norris Trophy odds. I'll give you a guy that's way off the board. And to me, he's got a legitimate shot to win this thing. Norris Trophy, Noah Hannafin at 500-1. 500-1, everybody. So just maybe a little sprinkle on that, and it would pay for a nice little vacation to Australia or wherever you want to go. Huh, Jake?
I'm going to bet that right now, Bob. That's you convinced me. Didn't think you were going that deep on I thought you were going to give me something like 20-1, 25-1. I would have been interested, but you're giving out 500-1s already. This is we're off to a hot start here.
500-1 available on FanDuel. All right, wrap it up. Put a bow.
Just never know about the Vegas Golden Knights. That's for sure. Thank you to everybody who asked the questions today. I appreciate it. Thank you to producer Bob Bender, as you heard right there. For Pete Jensen and Jake Hahn, I'm Nick Alberga. You've been listening to NHL Fantasy on Ice, delivered by Skip, the official food delivery app of the NHL.